The last capital budgeting method that we want to introduce is the payback period rule. The payback period rule answer the question, how long does it take to pay back the initial cost? So the is very different than our other methods, which focuses on the value that a project create or the return that a project generates. Here we ask how soon can we get our money back? So let's take a look at our original cash flows and see how we can apply the payback rule. So in this project, which costs $165,000 in the beginning, we can determine how soon it takes before we get our money back. After 1 year, we get in year one, we have $63,120, which means that after year one, when you add up the cash flow, I can compute a column called the cumulative cash flow. In year zero, I'm still out $165,000. After 1 year, adding back the $63,120 that I earned, I am still out $101,880. So again, pause the video to make sure that you are following along the calculation that we are going through. Of course, we don't have our money back yet. We are still out over $100,000. So we know that it takes at least year two. Year two, we make another $70,800. So we add that back and we find that we are still out $31,080 after year two. In year three, we're going to get $91,080. So we know we're going to get all of our money back by the end of year three. So the payback that we are looking at is going to be 2+ years. Now we can get a little bit more precise, but that in order to get a little bit more precise, it actually requires us to make a very important assumption. And that very important assumption is, when do we get the $91,800 in year three? If we assume that we get that money back evenly throughout year three, meaning each month we get the same amount, then we can prorate the amount of money that we owe. So assuming that we receive our cash evenly, then we know that we are still out $31,080 and we will get back $91,080 throughout the year. Then it's going to take us about 1/3 into year three before we get our money back. So our payback period will be 2.3 years. That's a very important assumption because it is possible that you may have a situation where the contract is such that you don't get paid until the end of the year. Then it doesn't matter you make 91,000, you are going to get the 91,000 in December. Then your payback period is the entire full 3 years. So this is a big approximation, and it requires you to understand the assumption behind the detailed collection from the project. Assuming that this is a very big project and cash flow is somewhat even, then this is a good approximation. So the next question you want to ask is, well, is 2.3 years good enough? And that is probably the most important or difficult question to answer when we use the payback rule, because how soon is good enough or how fast is fast enough, there's no economic justification for that. It really depends on what management determine as an acceptable payback period. And this is true for independent projects when you need to set a minimum acceptance criteria. The payback method becomes a little bit more less desirable when you are ranking mutually exclusive projects, because the intuition will be to select the project that has the shortest payback period. But the shortest payback period is not necessarily the best because on the one hand, you get your money back fast, but you may or may not um, be choosing the most valuable project. So it depends. If your goal is to increase the value of the firm, to maximize the value of the firm, then the payback period rule doesn't really help you address that question directly. So the advantages of the payback method is that it is easy to understand because it's really easy to convince someone and say, hey, this is a good investment. You're going to get your money back in 6 months. And there is some comfort in understanding or knowing how long your original investment will be at risk. Um, and it does bias towards liquidity because you favor short-term projects over long-term projects. And it adjusts for uncertainty of later cash flow because the longer you have to wait to get the cash back, the later year cash flow tend to be more uncertain. There are more unknowns later on in the life of the project. The original payback method ignore those cash flow altogether. Now there are a lot of disadvantages associated with the payback method. The biggest one is ignoring the time value of money. And there is a proposal to uh, remedy for this problem, and that is to use a discounted payback method. Um, if you use the discounted payback method, you do the same calculation, except you use the present value of cash flow instead of cash flow. So it requires one more step of calculation. So in the example I did, we just use the cash flow and look at when do we get our money back. If you're going to use discount payback, you have to take one step first. You have to first convert all the cash flow into present values, and then you do the same analysis. It does remedy the time value of money, but then it also makes the intuition behind the payback method not as apparent because then it's not just getting your original investment back, but getting your original investment back plus the time value of money. So it takes away the advantage of a simple, intuitive explanation of the payback rule. The biggest disadvantage of the payback period perhaps is requiring an arbitrary acceptance criteria. So you don't really have an economic and financial unbiased way of deciding um, how soon is fast enough. So that's really one of the biggest disadvantages of the payback period. There are additional disadvantages that are listed in the slide, and I think they are pretty self-explanatory. Another challenge of the payback rule is that it bias against long-term project, and long-term projects sometimes may have very high positive net present value. So that can create a conflict. Um, when you have projects that have non-conventional cash flow, meaning that you may have a negative cash flow sometime during the project, then you can have multiple payback, or how do you even interpret payback? Because if you have a cash outflow in year 2, do you just count your original investment or do you count your later investment? So again, payback is useful for probably smaller projects, and that doesn't require sophisticated cash flows, and that give us a gut check on how desirable a particular project is. To summarize, when we do capital budgeting in the real world, we definitely want to use more than one criteria. When I used to be a financial analyst and we do capital budgeting, my boss requires us to use the net present value method, the internal rate of return method, and also the payback period. So we have to compute 3 criteria for every project that we analyze. As I said, the NPV and IR is very commonly used, particularly when we are choosing investments. And payback is a secondary criteria, so it provides the intuition and as a way to as you can say, to look at to present the project to people who may not be familiar with finance. So if someone doesn't understand what net present value is and what internal rate of return is, and that oftentimes occur in a team, because I could be working with engineers who are very well versed in the technical aspects of the projects, but they are not well versed in finance or economics. So when I try to explain the net present value, internal rate of return, it's not enough just to give the number. I have to explain what that method represent. And that can be challenging sometimes, whereas the payback method is so intuitive. I can make the presentation and say it takes 2 years to get our investment back, and we are fairly certain we can obtain the cash flow. We may be 80% certain that our cash flow estimate is correct. And that makes a payback method a very useful tool in explaining and supporting the project. To conclude, we have covered 4 different capital budgeting methods in this chapter. We covered the net present value method, the internal rate of return method, the profitability method, and index method, and also the payback period method. Thank you.